I've talked a little bit in past videos about my deployments to Iraq, my combat deployments, but never in a dedicated video to explain about what I did, where I deployed to, all that kind of stuff. And that's questions I sometimes get from viewers out there asking, did I deploy? Where did I deploy to? So let's cover that. So we'll talk about my first combat deployment, which in fact, that's the only kind of deployments I ever did. I never did any training deployments or anything. I only did 2 deployments, and both 2 deployments were combat deployments. So let's talk about the first one. So I was stationed at Fort Riley for 2 years, then I went to Korea for 2 years, and then upon leaving Korea, I went to Fort Carson. And when I arrived at Fort Carson, I went to the 3rd ACR. They are now the 3rd CR out of Fort Hood, but at this time they were out of Fort Carson. When I showed up to that unit, the individuals were just returning from their deployment to Iraq. This was at the very beginning of the Iraq War. They were returning from their deployment for a 1-year deployment to Iraq, and they already knew that they were going back in another year. So I expected, to deploy within the next year. So leading up to it, we did the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California. We did multiple field problems, a lot of preparation to prepare you for the deployment. And then when the time came, well, we deployed. That deployment was in 2005 where I was going to be deploying. So basically, roughly, it was about a year after I had arrived to the unit. So I had time to kind of train and everything with the unit. There were some soldiers that showed up in much shorter of a time frame to that unit and then deployed with us, but it was in 2005 that we deployed. They told you, what day you were leaving on. You had like a schedule they were kind of doing. People were leaving in kind of like waves. So you had maybe a handful of people that leave one day, another handful of people leave another day. And with actually both deployments, I ended up leaving sooner than they told me I was leaving. I think, as an example, for the first deployment, I believe they told me I was leaving on Wednesday, and then ended up getting bumped up by a few days. So maybe it ended up being Sunday or Monday instead that I ended up actually going and taking off. So it was a thing early in the morning, you had to go draw weapons, you had all your gear packed. There was some stuff that got put in a Connex, so it got shipped off prior to, that you didn't have to carry everything with you, but you had certain items you would take with you. So you had that stuff with you plus your weapon, your NVGs, and so you drew all that stuff like that, and then you go and sit in a gym and wait. So I remember, sitting in the gym, hanging out, waiting. They had entertainment and things for you to do because you had to hang out in the gym for quite a while. I don't know what the purpose of it was, but accountability, something, I don't know. But they had food for you, which were usually these they're called Jimmy Deans. They're just these little sandwiches and little kind of portable lunches kind of a thing. So you had that. They had some PlayStations hooked up. They had some TVs hooked up, and we're all just kind of hanging out, waiting until we were going to get on the bus to take us over to the airport. Now for flying out, we went out of the Jet Center in Colorado Springs. So you don't actually fly out of the Colorado Springs airport, at least not for my deployments, we didn't. We flew out of the Jet Center, which was kind of nearby. And so you had a commercial airline that was solely for these military individuals. So the only people that were on this flight were all of us from this unit that was taking us overseas. So the way there, I believe for this one, we went from Colorado Springs, I think it was all the way to Amsterdam. I can't remember if we stopped off somewhere first, but I'm pretty sure I think we went all the way to Amsterdam. And it wasn't a thing we got to check out Amsterdam. We landed at the airport and we were kind of restricted to a specific terminal that they had blocked off for us. So we weren't with all the civilians and everything in the area. So you were kind of just confined to that area. And then we kind of hung out there. They refueled the plane, got everything ready. And then from there, they took us over to Kuwait. So the process of that was we arrived at Kuwait, you were at Camp Buehring, which was in Kuwait, and it was kind of preparing everything, right? We're waiting for equipment to arrive. We had some people that arrived early to receive equipment and get it off the boat and everything. And then you had some classes to do. You're trying to adjust the time. They were pretty relaxed on, you trying to get relaxed to the time, at least with my first unit, and actually even my second unit too. But they were pretty relaxed with us, kind of you're sleeping a little bit during the day, awake during the night, and they kind of gave us a few days to try to get acclimated type of thing, but we still had things we had to get done. So as long as you were still accomplishing things you had to get done, they were kind of relaxed, where if you weren't doing something and you were kind of sleeping during the day because you weren't yet used to the time, they were kind of lenient on that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, after about a few days or whatever, you had to kind of get acclimated and everything because, you had a lot of things to get done before we were actually going to move from Kuwait into Iraq. For this first deployment, we were told we were going to Baghdad, Iraq. So we had to drive from Kuwait up to Iraq. And I remember it was a really long drive driving up there. I think we stopped somewhere in the halfway point. I don't remember what the camp was called or the fob was called that we stopped at. And you kind of just slept in your trucks for that night and then continued the rest of the next day and then arrived at Baghdad International Airport, or BIAP. In this case, I think we were at Fort I can't remember what the actual name of the FOB was. It wasn't Liberty, I'll get to that. That was my second one, but it was a smaller one in the BIOP area kind of a thing. But as soon as we arrived, basically, we found out that, hey, you're not gonna be staying here for very long, so don't get too comfortable. We had these big tents we were living in with just cots and everything, and that's where we were gonna stay for the time being. And I think I personally was only there for, I think, 3 days before I was on what was called the Flea, which is kind of like the advanced party that was gonna go to the new location we were gonna go to help kind of get things ready and establish everything. So me and a bunch of other individuals, about 3 days later, ended up leaving from Baghdad to go up to Tal Afar, which was in the northern part of Iraq. So we had to drive all the way up there, and I think we probably stopped along the way again too, type of thing, but drive all the way up there. And then I remember the first day we arrived, we didn't have where to stay yet, so we had to sleep in our trucks. When we first arrived, I remember at Tal Afar, they ended up after a little bit, after I think that first day, giving us what were called shoes. There were these little kind of like small little trailer type of buildings that we were sleeping in, and those were pretty nice. They were pretty awesome, and we were doing that for, you know, the first several weeks before the rest of the unit came, while we were doing all these preparation stuff and everything. And they kicked us out of the chews, and we had to go set up tents and go live in tents for like 6 months. Those chews ended up going to like the officers, the senior enlisted, like platoon sergeants, first sergeant, sergeant major, all that kind of individuals. They didn't have enough to go around for all the soldiers, so for 6 months we were living in these big ass, you know, circus type of tents type of thing with cots and everything, no privacy, nothing, porta potties, you know, down the way, and we had to use that. It was after about 6 months they did get us actually chews for us to all stay in. A lot of the rooms were like 6 people to a room type of thing, and then a shower trailer down the way and a bathroom trailer down the way, and you kind of utilize that. As far as missions go, when I was on that deployment, that one was mostly heavily relied on log packs. So we had a lot of COPs, a lot of combat outposts that, you know, units were at from our unit from 30 ACR. So we'd have to do log packs to take equipment out to them, to take fuel, take food, all sorts of things, you know, pretty much daily. So it would kind of rotate, you know, some people would be on the log pack one day, and then maybe a couple days of not doing log pack, and then, you know, maybe a couple days in a row of doing log pack. It just kind of varied as far as how the schedule kind of worked. So we were doing a lot of those log pack missions. We did a lot of missions for picking up detainees. So you had like infantry and scouts and all sorts of individuals in the area. They were doing raids, and they would collect up individuals, and they would get loaded up into an LMTV, and you would take them back to the FOB, where we had a detention facility, and drop them off at the detention facility for them to get questioned to find out if they were actually involved with whatever the incident was, or if they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We also had to rotate through guards. We had to be actually guards at the detention facility, and so you do that a little bit. We also did some humanitarian aid missions where we were delivering like food to the local civilians, delivering some water and some other supplies to local civilians, so we did a lot of those as well. And then the last several months, I actually ended up working in ops. So we had an ops area, and I was one of the NCOs working in the ops area to kind of man the radios, man the missions that are going out, do a lot of kind of like operational stuff that kind of did stuff on the rear. So I think it was like the first like 8-9 months, I think, of the deployment, I was doing a lot of stuff on the road and everything, and doing a lot of missions. And then the last, 3 or 4 months of the deployment, I ended up just working inside of a little building, inside of a little tent kind of a thing, inside of operations. So that was a 12-month deployment, and that was my first one, and that was to mainly Tal Afar, Iraq. That base didn't have much of anything. The PX was a little semi-trailer. The chow hall was a decent chow hall, and that was about it. There was no other amenities. It was pretty barren, pretty kind of like, I don't know, nothing great in entertainment-wise. I mean, kind of expected on a combat deployment, but my second deployment did actually have a little bit more amenities. That's what I'm kind of leading into. There's probably a lot of things I'm leaving out about my first deployment based on time, so make sure to drop me comments. If you have some questions related to maybe my first deployment, second deployment, deployments in general, drop some comments, because there's probably going to be some things that are be left out, because otherwise this video would be really, really long and if I explained every single detail. So if there's specifics that you want to know that I'm probably leaving out, just let me know and I'll try to answer them. So let's get into my second deployment. My second deployment, we returned from Iraq, my first unit with their ACR. They were going to Fort Hood. I re-enlisted, like, stay at Fort Carson. I went over to 410 Cav and knew that in about a year they were deploying, so I expected to deploy again. This deployment, however, was a 15-month deployment. The idea was that you spend more time being deployed so you can spend more time with your family when you come back between deployments. So instead of 12 months on, 12 months off, it was 15 months on, 15 months off. That really didn't work out, and I think it kind of fell apart after our deployment. Other units were doing it too, but I don't think they continued doing that. So nonetheless, we expected to be deployed for 15 months. So this one we knew we were going to Baghdad again, and we kind of did a similar kind of a thing. You know, you went to the gym, you got to have family kind of hang out with you for a little bit, do the same kind of process, drawn weapons, MPGs, all that stuff. You have your bags, take a commercial flight, you know, of just enough soldiers to Kuwait. And again, I was at Camp Buehring. This time we went to Camp Buehring, and we were working out at Camp Buehring for, again, a month, doing some training, doing different things. And this time we did not drive vehicles from Camp Buehring to Iraq. We actually took a flight from there over to Biop, over to Baghdad. So we showed up over to Baghdad, and we were expected that we were gonna have to go and establish our area at this other FOB outside of Baghdad called FOB Prosperity. So we had a unit that was over at FOB Prosperity that we were replacing. All of our equipment got loaded up to go to FOB Prosperity, because instead of us driving it from Kuwait into Iraq, that stuff got loaded up onto other trucks, I guess, and it got sent up there. Plus we were also taking over a lot of the equipment from the other unit. But soon we found out we were not going to FOB Prosperity, and we were actually gonna have to be at Biop. So then we had to move all that equipment from Prosperity over to Biop, and this time we were actually at Camp Liberty. Camp Liberty has a lot of amendments. I mean, it sounds kind of spoiled, but Liberty actually had a lot of stuff. They had a couple chow halls, which were really nice. They had little buildings that were pretty good for our living conditions. You know, NCOs had 2 to a room, where, you know, E4 and below usually had 4 to a room, you know, senior NCOs by themselves kind of a thing. They had a PX that was actually pretty big, probably pretty close to the same size as the one in Fort Carson. They had a Taco Bell, they had a Cinnabon, they had a Popeyes, they had a green bean coffee. That one was actually pretty cushy. As far as, I guess, on base type of stuff, I mean, off base, still rough, you know, off the FOB, you know, mission wise, but on FOB was actually pretty cushy. It actually had a lot of amenities. With that deployment, I was the NCOIC for 410 Cav for the ammunition. So I was in charge of all the ammunition for 410 Cav to make sure, you know, if people needed more ammunition for the Bradleys, for, you know, the M4s or whatever, then I would be able to issue that stuff out. So we had a location that we had all of our ammo stored in that I had to keep inventory on. You know, sometimes we have to do missions to deliver that stuff to other cops that we had within the city of Baghdad, and then other like log pack missions and all sorts of things. Outside of that, one of the biggest things we were doing was barrier missions. So we would load up these huge concrete barriers onto our tractor trailers, onto our PLSs for the mission to take them out and put them along the roads to try to prevent against like snipers, IEDs, setting up like police stations, checkpoints, all that stuff. So really during that deployment, the big mission that was pretty heavy was setting up barriers. That one was definitely a lot more busier than probably my first deployment. There was a lot more night missions we were doing. It seemed like almost every night we were doing some sort of barrier mission, log pack, or some sort of mission that, you know, usually had us doing night operations, where like the first operation or the first deployment, it was a little bit of a mixture of both day missions and night missions, where this one was pretty much 98% night missions for my second deployment. So a lot of times that meant, you know, trying to get some sleep during the day because you're gonna be out all night long, but it's not always worked out. Sometimes there was times where you'd come back from being out all night doing mission, come back at like 5 in the morning, and things gotta get done, and there's not very many people available because there's other missions going on during the day. So the people that came back from the night mission are stuck doing some stuff during the day and getting no sleep. So that part really sucked. But on top of it, you know, 15 months really dragged on. It was really long. So that was a lot of the operations we were doing during that second deployment. During both deployments, I had opportunity to get to go home for 15 days, I believe, for both deployments. So I think I pretty much had it somewhere near the middle-ish. You didn't always get to choose. They usually had like a time frame, you know, hey, you can do between this and this time, and then they have to maintain a certain percentage, obviously, there, so that way not everybody's going to leave at the same time. But some individuals got stuck having to go early in the deployment. Some people get stuck going late in the deployment. I think both times I was pretty lucky, and it was pretty much around the middle of the deployment. So when they were sending you home, they would fly you over to Kuwait. You'd sit in Kuwait for like a day or two, and then you'd fly back to the States, and they'd pay for your airplane tickets and everything. All that was covered from, you know, coming from Iraq. So they'd send you to wherever it was you were going for your leave. You spend your 15 days. 15 days didn't start until you actually arrived in the States. So it didn't start when you left. It started when you actually arrived in the States. So then you had a report date of when your flight was going to take off to come back, you know, and you'd fly you back out to Kuwait, and you'd spend like a day or two in Kuwait, and then fly you back to the base you're at and get you to wherever you need to go to, and you return. So both times you had about 15 months. If you didn't want to take, or not 15 months, you had 15 days. Outside of that, if you didn't want to take 15 days, you could choose to take a 4-day pass and go to Qatar, and some soldiers would rather do that. But I chose to do the 15 days, so I did 15 days of the leave to go back home each time. So after both deployments, when it's all over, you head back to the States, you go through customs still, you still have to do customs. You know, it's all military run, it's not like civilian customs, but military run customs, so you had to still have your stuff checked through customs. Even prior to like leaving, they had to like inspect like your boxes that you were shipping back and the Connex to make sure you weren't bringing anything back that you weren't supposed to bring back. Like if you're trying to bring back some weapons or some other things that you found in the local area, not allowed, those are considered war trophies, so all that stuff got inspected. The fun thing though, like both times when you returned, they usually make a pretty big deal out of it. You return, they are usually handing you like McDonald's cheeseburgers or something as you get off the plane. You get onto a bus, they take you over to base and, you know, to turn your weapons, but on the way from the airport to base, you usually have a police escort. There's like signs all over the place that people put up knowing that you guys were returning on that day, because they tell the families, hey, your loved one or whatever is going to be returning on this day, so expect to be at this special event center, this location for the welcome home ceremony. So people would usually put up signs like on the route that they knew the buses would be taking. But that was really cool having like a police escort, because they're blocking traffic and everything for these buses, that they're taking you back, you know, to the base. You get on base and everything like that, you turn your weapons and everything, and then you'd head over to, in our case for Fort Carson, the Special Events Center, stand outside, get information. They have some kind of patriotic music playing, doors open up with a fog machine going, you march into the building, and then some people give some speeches, and then you get released to your families. So both times we'd usually get like a 4-day weekend, you know, after returns, you had 4 days off to relax a little bit and then return on a specific day to begin some of the recovery operations that we had to do. So again, probably leaving out some details of these deployments for time purposes to not make this video like a half hour, 30-minute, hour-long video, whatever. I'm not sure what it actually runs up to, probably getting pretty close to that. So make sure to ask me some questions in the comment section, because there might be some things I'm leaving out for time purposes that you want to know about as far as what it's like on a combat deployment, and I am more than willing to help kind of share that experience with you. So leave me some comments down below and I'll try to answer them the best that I can. Now I actually have a video that actually talks about what the differences are between like a combat deployment and a non-combat deployment. And if you want to learn about that, just check this video out right here. Check out my links down in the description box down below for affiliates, social media links. Follow me on Instagram and you work on the Instagram game. Thanks for watching. I'm Christopher Chaos. See you next time. See ya.